Billionaire CEO marries an unpopular woman as a bet, and is amazed when. Before diving into the story, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Alexander Chin stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, absently swirling a glass of 30-year-old scotch while watching the sun set behind San Francisco's iconic skyline. At 35, he had everything money could buy. Tech Future, his AI company, had just hit $100 billion in valuation, making him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in Silicon Valley. Yet tonight, surrounded by the trappings of success, he felt strangely hollow. Another cover story, Alex? James Morton's voice cut through his brooding. His best friend since college and Tech Future's CFO lounged on the Italian leather couch, scrolling through his phone. Forbes is calling you the king of Silicon Valley, though they do mention you're still a bachelor. The vultures are circling, wondering who'll finally catch the golden goose. Alex's jaw tightened. The media's obsession with his love life had grown tiresome, especially since Sarah Williams, the celebrity influencer he'd been casually dating, had turned their breakup into a viral sensation. Her tearful Instagram video claiming he was emotionally unavailable and married to his work had sparked weeks of speculation about his capability for genuine human connection. Maybe they're right, James continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. When was the last time you took a risk that wasn't calculated on a spreadsheet? The great Alexander Chen, who disrupted the tech industry, can't even disrupt his own comfort zone. I take plenty of risks, Alex snapped, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. In truth, every aspect of his life was carefully controlled, each decision weighed against potential outcomes. It was how he'd built his empire, and how he'd protected himself since watching his father gamble away their family's security on one reckless venture after another. Prove it, James challenged, sitting up straighter. I bet you couldn't step out of your perfect bubble for even a month. Marry someone completely unexpected, someone the board would hate, someone who'd make Sarah's head explode. Show everyone you're more than just algorithms and profit margins. Alex turned from the window, ready to dismiss the ridiculous suggestion, when his eye caught the evening news playing silently on his office TV. Dr. Elena Martinez's face filled the screen, her expression fierce as she addressed a crowd of protesters. The controversial bioethicist had become a pariah in tech circles for her scathing critiques of Silicon Valley's move fast and break things mentality, especially her recent expose on Tech Future's main competitor. While Alex secretly agreed with some of her points about ethical AI development, her uncompromising stance and confrontational approach had made her decidedly unpopular among his peers. Alex said suddenly, surprising himself. I'll marry Elena Martinez. James nearly choked on his drink. The technology's conscience herself? The woman who called you a digital despot in her last Twitter thread? That's not taking a risk, that's corporate suicide. But Alex's mind was already racing, seeing the elegant symmetry of it. 1 month. I'll prove I can win over even my harshest critic. If I succeed, you take over all shareholder meetings for the next year. If I fail. He paused, knowing he needed to stake something valuable. If I fail, I'll step down as CEO and let the board install someone more suitable. You're actually serious, James said, studying his friend's face. You know she'll never agree to it. Everyone has a price, Alex replied, but even as the words left his mouth, something in him flinched. It was exactly the kind of cynical statement Elena had accused tech leaders of hiding behind. I'll offer to fund her research institute, completely hands-off, no strings attached. She wants to shape the future of ethical AI development? This is her chance. And when she finds out it's all because of a bet? Alex waved away the concern, though a small voice in his head warned him he might be making his father's mistake, letting pride push him into a reckless gamble. It's a win-win. She gets her institute, I prove I'm not some soulless tech robot, and maybe. He trailed off, watching Elena gesturing passionately on the screen. Maybe we both learned something. James shook his head, but pulled out his phone. I'll have legal draw up the paperwork. But Alex? Try to remember she's a person, not a problem to be solved with enough processing power. Alex barely heard him, already composing the email that would set his challenge in motion. He'd built his fortune by seeing patterns others missed, by calculating probabilities and optimizing outcomes. This would be no different. 1 month to prove everyone wrong about him. 1 month to turn his greatest critic into his wife. He had no way of knowing that Elena Martinez was about to completely rewrite his carefully coded world. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Elena Martinez sat in her cramped office at the Institute for Ethical Technology, surrounded by stacks of research papers and half-empty coffee cups. The lights in the aging building flickered again, another reminder that funding was running desperately low. She rubbed her temples, trying to ward off an impending headache as she read through another rejection letter from a potential donor. Most technology companies weren't exactly eager to fund research that might expose their ethical shortcomings. Her phone buzzed with another death threat, the third this week. Ever since her exposé on global tech's discriminatory AI algorithms, the trolls had been relentless. She'd revealed how the company's hiring software systematically filtered out candidates from minority backgrounds, but instead of addressing the bias, global tech's PR machine had painted her as a radical activist trying to destroy innovation. The death threats she could handle, it was the growing isolation that wore her down. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid her, conferences rescinded speaking invitations, and even some of her closest friends had quietly distanced themselves, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Dr. Martinez? Her research assistant, Tommy, appeared in the doorway, his expression unusually hesitant. You might want to check your email. Like, right now. Elena opened her inbox and nearly spilled her coffee. There it was, an email from Alexander Chen himself, CEO of Tech Future. She'd criticized his company's aggressive expansion into autonomous decision-making systems, pointing out the dangers of prioritizing speed over safety. While she respected his technical brilliance, his company embodied everything she fought against, the Silicon Valley mentality that treated ethical concerns as mere speed bumps on the road to progress. The email's contents made her laugh out loud, then frown, then read it again in disbelief. Chen was proposing marriage, a temporary arrangement, he explained with typical tech world efficiency, that would benefit them both. In exchange for 1 month as his wife, he would provide full funding for her institute, with complete academic independence guaranteed in writing. No oversight, no interference, just the resources to continue her work on her own terms. This has to be a joke, she muttered, but her mind was already racing. Her institute was 3 months away from closing its doors. Without funding, years of critical research would be lost, and global tech's discriminatory practices would continue unchecked. She'd sworn to protect the vulnerable from technological overreach, but was she willing to compromise her own principles to do it? What does he want? Tommy asked, peering at her screen. A wife, apparently. Elena's voice dripped with skepticism. For 1 month. In exchange for funding the institute. Tommy whistled. That's either really creepy or surprisingly progressive, I can't decide which. Elena stood up and began pacing, a habit that helped her think. It's obviously a PR stunt. He's probably trying to soften his image after that mess with the influencer. Or worse, he's planning to discredit me from the inside. She stopped suddenly, a new thought striking her. Unless, what if we could use this? A month of direct access to Tech Future's inner workings. We could ensure ethical guidelines are built into their systems from the ground up, not tacked on as an afterthought. You're not seriously considering it? Tommy looked concerned. This is Alexander Chen we're talking about. The guy who said regulation would strangle the future in its crib. Elena picked up a framed photo from her desk, her father, standing proudly in his union jacket at a workers' rights rally. He'd taught her that sometimes you had to work within the system to change it. 1 month of compromise for years of independent research? To actually have the resources to make real change? She set down the photo with determination. Besides, Chen's about to learn that bringing a conscience into his perfect world has consequences. She sat down at her computer and began typing a response, a slight smile playing at her lips. If Alexander Chen wanted a marriage of convenience, she'd make sure it was the most inconvenient month of his life. She'd force him to confront the human cost of his technological utopia, to see the faces behind the data points. And maybe, just maybe, she could transform Tech Future from within. Send out a message to the team, she told Tommy. Tell them to document everything. Every ethical breach, every questionable decision, every shortcut. By the time this month is over, Tech Future will either become a model of responsible innovation, or I'll have enough material for a book that'll make the Global Tech Exposé look like a puff piece. As she hit send on her reply to Chen, Elena felt a familiar fire in her chest, the same determination that had carried her through years of fighting against the tech industry's worst impulses. Alexander Chen thought he could buy her principles with a blank check. He was about to discover that some things weren't for sale, and that real disruption meant challenging the very foundations of power, not just updating the code that ran it. The private dining room at Lumiere felt like neutral territory, though Elena couldn't help noting that it was Chen's choice, a Michelin-starred restaurant where even the air felt expensive. She deliberately wore her usual work outfit, sensible blazer, minimal makeup, her dark hair pulled back in its typical no-nonsense bun. If Chen expected her to suddenly transform into arm candy, he was in for a rude awakening. Alexander Chen rose when she entered, his bespoke suit probably worth more than her annual salary. She'd seen him in photos and video clips, but in person, there was something more complex about him, a coiled intensity beneath the polished surface, like a supercomputer humming behind smooth glass. Dr. Martinez, he extended his hand. Thank you for coming. Mr. Chen, she matched his formal tone, her handshake firm. I assume you have a contract prepared? Or should we discuss the terms of this unusual arrangement first? A flash of something, amusement? Annoyance? Crossed his face before the professional mask returned. Straight to business. I appreciate efficiency. He gestured to the chair, which she took without waiting for him to help. Though perhaps we could order first? The chef here does remarkable things with local ingredients. I already ate, Elena lied, ignoring her empty stomach. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of buying her dinner. Let's be clear about what this is, Mr. Chen. You want to rehabilitate your image, and for some reason, you think marrying your biggest critic will do that. I want to ensure ethical oversight of technological development. This isn't a romance, it's a business transaction. Chen leaned back, studying her with those calculating eyes. You've made your opinion of me and my company quite clear in your articles, Dr. Martinez. Yet you're willing to enter into this arrangement. Why? Because unlike you, I'm willing to admit when the ends justify uncomfortable means. She met his gaze directly. 1 month of playing your wife in exchange for resources that could prevent countless people from being harmed by unchecked technological advancement? That's a trade I can live with. And you don't think there's any possibility that spending time inside Tech Future might change your perspective on how we operate? Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Do you know what the difference is between us, Mr. Chen? You see technology as the solution to humanity's problems. I see humanity as the solution to technology's problems. An interesting philosophy, he replied, removing a folder from his briefcase. Though perhaps a limited one. But we can debate ethics after we handle the paperwork. The contract stipulates full funding for your institute for 5 years, with an option to renew. Complete academic independence, as promised. In return, you agree to play the role of devoted wife for 1 month, including public appearances and family functions. Elena took the contract, reading carefully. And private functions? I assume your board of directors needs convincing? They'll need to believe it's genuine, he admitted. Many of them have known me for years. They'll expect to see a real relationship. You want me to convince them I've fallen in love with a man who represents everything I fight against? Elena raised an eyebrow. I'm a researcher, Mr. Chen, not an actress. Then don't act, he challenged, something hardening in his voice. Approach it like one of your studies. Immerse yourself in the subject. Maybe you'll discover that the real tech future, the real Alexander Chen, doesn't quite match your preconceptions. Elena found herself caught off guard by the intensity in his expression. For a moment, she glimpsed something beneath the billionaire facade, a need to prove himself that felt almost human. She pushed the observation aside. This was exactly what she'd warned about in her papers, the danger of anthropomorphizing systems that were designed to seem personable but ultimately served cold, commercial interests. One addition to the contract, she said, pulling out her pen. I want full access during this month. Board meetings, development discussions, ethics committees, everything. If I'm going to be your wife, even temporarily, I want to see how the company really operates. Chen's jaw tightened, and she prepared for a refusal. Instead, he gave a short nod. Granted. But you'll need to sign an NDA, and any publications about what you observe will need legal review. To prevent me from exposing actual wrongdoing, or to protect legitimate trade secrets? Both, probably, he answered with unexpected honesty. Welcome to the real world, Dr. Martinez. It's rarely as black and white as your articles suggest. Elena signed the contract with a flourish, then stood. 1 month, starting tomorrow. I'll move into your penthouse, attend your functions, and play the dutiful wife. But understand this, I'm not changing who I am or what I believe in. If you wanted someone to smile prettily and ignore ethics violations, you should have stuck with the influencer. As she turned to leave, Chen called after her. You never asked why I chose you. She paused at the door. Because I'm your opposite? Your critics will assume you've changed if you can win over your biggest opponent? Because you've never compromised your principles for personal gain, he said quietly. Until now. I want to understand what finally made you willing to blur your clear lines between right and wrong. Elena felt a chill at the insight. She'd assumed Chen was all surface, all calculation. This glimpse of perception was unsettling. Good night, Mr. Chen. I'll see you tomorrow. Try not to disrupt any fundamental human rights before then. As she walked away, Elena could feel his eyes on her back, measuring, analyzing. She'd gone into this thinking she would be the one conducting a study, gathering data on tech future's ethical failings. But Chen's parting words nagged at her. Had she underestimated him? Was she the one being studied? In the elevator, she finally let out a shaky breath. 1 month. She could maintain her principles for 1 month in the heart of everything she opposed. But as the doors closed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection and wondered, when did compromise become courage, and at what point did it become corruption? If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Elena's battered Toyota Prius looked comically out of place in the pristine parking garage of Chen's luxury high-rise. She grabbed her single suitcase, she'd refused the car he'd sent and his offer to have her things professionally moved, and headed for the private elevator. The security guard's eyes widened in recognition, no doubt wondering how the notorious tech critic had gained access to Silicon Valley's most exclusive address. The penthouse was exactly what she'd expected, a monument to minimalist luxury, all clean lines and smart technology. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while hidden speakers played ambient music that adjusted to her presence. Elena resisted the urge to start taking notes for her research. Everything was designed to impress, to demonstrate mastery over the environment. It was pure Alexander Chen. The closet has been prepared for your things, a voice said behind her, making her jump. Chen emerged from what appeared to be his home office, still focused on his tablet. Though you might want to consider some new options for the charity gala tomorrow night. My stylist can dash. My clothes are fine, Elena cut him off, dropping her suitcase by the genuine Eames chair. I don't need a makeover to make you look good, Chen. The whole point is that you're supposedly embracing someone different from your usual type. He finally looked up, taking in her practical pantsuit and sensible shoes. Something like frustration flickered across his face. This isn't about making you look good. It's about showing respect for the occasion and the other guests. Ah yes, heaven forbid we offend the Billionaire Boys Club with off-the-rack clothing. Elena began unpacking her laptop and research materials. By the way, I'll need access to your home network. I have work to do. Chen's eyebrows rose. You want access to my private server? The one containing sensitive company data? I'm your wife now, remember? Elena smiled sweetly. Surely you trust me with your passwords. Unless this marriage isn't as genuine as you're claiming? Before Chen could respond, the elevator chimed. James Morton strode in, then stopped short at the domestic tableau before him. Dr. Martinez. You're here already. And making yourself at home, I see. James and I have a standing dinner meeting on Thursdays, Chen explained, though Elena hadn't asked. To discuss company strategy. Perfect, Elena said, powering up her laptop. I'd love to sit in. After all, a wife should take interest in her husband's work, shouldn't she? The two men exchanged glances. Actually, James began, some of the matters we're discussing are quite sensitive. I signed your NDA, Elena reminded them. And Chen agreed I'd have full access. Unless you'd prefer I start my marriage by dining alone while the men talk business? Chen's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. Fine. But remember, you're here to observe, not critique every decision. Of course, Elena agreed innocently. I'll just listen and take notes. For posterity. Over takeout from an exclusive sushi restaurant, Elena had vetoed their usual steakhouse. She watched the two men discuss Tech Future's latest projects. Despite her promise to simply observe, she couldn't help interjecting when they began discussing the rollout of their new predictive policing AI. You can't seriously be considering implementing this without community oversight, she interrupted. The potential for bias in the training data alone. The algorithms are neutral, Chen argued. They simply process existing crime statistics. Statistics gathered through decades of systemic discrimination. You're just automating existing prejudices and calling it innovation. James watched their exchange like a tennis match, until Chen finally threw down his chopsticks in exasperation. This is exactly why I didn't want you in this meeting. You're not here to restructure my company. The silence that followed was deafening. James cleared his throat. I should go. You two clearly have some things to discuss. He beat a hasty retreat to the elevator. Left alone, Elena and Chen stared at each other across the ruins of dinner. This is never going to work if you fight me on everything, he said finally. It's never going to mean anything if I don't, she countered. You wanted a wife, not a yes woman. Someone who actually cares about the impact of your work. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. Chen ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, momentarily disrupting his composed image. 1 month, he muttered, almost to himself. It's only 1 month. Elena gathered her notes and headed for the guest room. She'd made it clear separate bedrooms were non-negotiable. At the door, she paused. Chen? That predictive policing AI? If you roll it out as is, I'll have no choice but to publish my concerns. Wife or not. Is that a threat, Dr. Martinez? No, she said quietly. It's a promise. And it's Elena. If we're married, you should probably use my first name. She closed the door before he could respond, leaning against it with a shaky breath. Day 1, and she was already fighting battles she hadn't expected. She'd come prepared to document Tech Future's ethical failings, but she hadn't anticipated how personal it would feel to witness them up close. How much it would hurt to see brilliant minds like Chen's being used to perpetuate systemic injustice in the name of progress. On her laptop, she began typing her notes for the day. Under observations, she wrote, subject displays genuine belief in technological neutrality, possible blind spot regarding human elements in system design. Then, after a moment's hesitation, signs of potential willingness to engage in ethical debate, responds to direct challenges rather than dismissing them entirely. She paused, cursor blinking. Was she documenting Tech Future's practices, or trying to understand Alexander Chen himself? And why did it suddenly feel like the latter might be more important? The annual Tech for Tomorrow Charity Gala was Silicon Valley's premier social event, where innovation met philanthropy in a carefully choreographed dance of wealth and influence. Elena stood before the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the one formal dress she owned, a simple black column that she'd worn to accept her Ethics in Technology award last year. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd be wearing it tonight to play the role of a tech titan's wife. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Elena? The car is waiting. Chen's voice carried a note of impatience. She'd refused his attempt to send in a professional styling team, leading to a tense morning of passive-aggressive comments about maintaining appropriate appearances. She opened the door to find him immaculate in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car. His eyes widened slightly as they took in her appearance, her hair loose for once, minimal jewelry, and the elegant simplicity of her dress. For a moment, something shifted in his expression before he caught himself. You look suitable, he managed. Such a romantic, Elena replied dryly. Don't strain yourself, Chen. Remember, we're madly in love, despite our differences. Try to look less like you're heading to a board meeting. The ride to the venue was silent, tension crackling between them. Elena used the time to review her mental notes on key players they'd encounter. She'd studied Tech Future's board members, major investors, and potential rivals, anything that might help her understand the power dynamics shaping the company's decisions. Remember, Chen said as they pulled up to the red carpet, the story is that we've been quietly dating for months. Your criticism of the company was actually what intrigued me. I found your passion for ethics compelling. How original, Elena muttered. The powerful man, taming his fierce critic with love. I'm sure Sarah Williams will be thrilled with that narrative. Speaking of Sarah, Chen adjusted his bow tie, she'll be here tonight. Try not to start any public debates about the ethical implications of influencer culture. Before Elena could retort, their door opened to a barrage of camera flashes. Chen's hand found the small of her back, guiding her with practiced ease. The touch was impersonal, proprietary, a CEO managing his assets. Elena forced herself to smile, playing her part while cataloging the microaggressions for her research. The whispers started immediately. Elena caught fragments as they moved through the crowd. Can't believe he married her. Must be a publicity stunt. That radical who attacked global tech. Chen's hand tightened slightly on her back, either in warning or support, she couldn't tell which. Alexander. A willowy blonde in a designer gown, cut through the crowd like a yacht through water. Sarah Williams, even more flawless in person than in her social media posts, air-kissed Chen's cheek before turning a practiced smile on Elena. And this must be the activist I've heard so much about. How fascinating that you've managed to capture our Alex's attention. Dr. Martinez, Elena corrected firmly. And I assure you, capturing attention wasn't my goal. I simply believe in holding powerful people accountable for their actions. How adorable, Sarah purred. Alex always did have a weakness for projects. Though usually they're technological rather than social. Chen stepped smoothly between them. Elena's work on ethical AI development is revolutionizing how we think about technological responsibility. In fact, her insights have already influenced several of Tech Future's new initiatives. Elena's head snapped toward him in surprise. This wasn't part of their agreed-upon story. But before she could question it, they were surrounded by board members and investors, all eager to meet the woman who had supposedly transformed the industry's most eligible bachelor into a devoted husband. Throughout the evening, Elena watched Chen work the room with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. Yet something was different. When introducing her to key investors, he actually mentioned her research. During discussions about Tech Future's latest projects, he referenced her concerns about algorithmic bias, not defensively, but as legitimate considerations being factored into development. The real shock came during his speech. As the event's major donor, Chen was expected to address the crowd. Elena prepared herself for the usual tech industry platitudes about innovation and disruption. Instead, she found herself listening in growing astonishment as he spoke about the responsibility that came with technological power. "My wife," he said, glancing at her with what looked remarkably like genuine respect, "recently reminded me that true innovation isn't just about moving fast and breaking things. It's about understanding what we're building and why. About considering the human impact of our decisions. Tech Future is committed to leading the industry not just in technological advancement, but in ethical development." The applause was polite but confused. Elena felt slightly dazed. Was this all part of the performance? A calculated move to boost the company's image? Or had some of her arguments actually gotten through? Her confusion only deepened when Sarah cornered her in the powder room. "He's different with you," the influencer said abruptly. "I thought this was just another of his strategic moves, but I've never seen him adapt his views for anyone. Not even a little." Elena stared at her reflection, trying to ignore the unsettling implications of Sarah's words. "We're from different worlds," she said finally. "This is just a temporary alignment of interests." Sarah's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Keep telling yourself that, honey. But I know Alex Chen. He doesn't change his presentation unless something's changed inside." She paused at the door. "Just remember, he processes everything like code. Input, output, logical progression. The question is, what kind of changes are you programming into his system?" Left alone, Elena gripped the marble counter, her carefully maintained professional distance feeling suddenly shaky. She'd come to this marriage prepared to document ethical violations and corporate manipulation. Instead, she found herself watching Chen actually engage with her ideas, even if he didn't fully agree. Was she effecting change from within, as she'd hoped? Or was she the one being changed, slowly accepting the pragmatic compromises she'd always criticized? When she returned to the ballroom, Chen was deep in conversation with a group of investors. But his eyes found her immediately, something warming in his expression as she approached. For a fraction of a second, Elena felt her pulse jump in response. Then she ruthlessly suppressed it, reminding herself that this was all an elaborate performance. Wasn't it? The morning after the gala, Elena sat cross-legged on Chen's pristine kitchen counter, drinking coffee and scrolling through the media coverage on her tablet. Their appearance had sparked exactly the kind of buzz Chen had presumably wanted, the tech world's most eligible bachelor tamed by his fiercest critic made for irresistible headlines. What troubled her were the photos. Someone had captured a moment she didn't remember, Chen looking at her while she spoke passionately to a group of investors, his expression uncommonly unguarded. "You're sitting on my counter." Chen's voice made her jump, nearly spilling her coffee. He stood in the kitchen doorway, already impeccable in a tailored suit despite the early hour. "There's a perfectly good table right there. The counter gives me a better vantage point to observe the native habits of billionaires in their natural habitat," Elena replied, not moving. "For instance, I've noticed you organize your coffee pods by country of origin and roasting date." Very telling. A muscle ticked in his jaw, but instead of arguing, he simply reached around her for his own coffee supplies. The casual domesticity of the moment felt suddenly dangerous. Elena busied herself with her tablet, pretending not to notice how his shoulder brushed against her knee. "Your speech last night," she said abruptly. "The part about ethical development. Was that just for show?" Chen didn't answer immediately, focusing on his coffee preparation with scientific precision. "Would you believe me if I said no?" "Probably not." "Then why ask?" He turned to face her, closer than she'd expected. "You've already decided who I am and what I believe. Your research methodology is usually more thorough than that." Elena felt her cheeks warm with something between anger and embarrassment. "Fine. Convince me. Show me Tech Future's ethical review process. Let me see how you're actually implementing these grand promises. Today? He checked his watch. I have back-to-back meetings until dash. Perfect. I'll come with you. What better way to show off your devoted wife's integration into the company? Chen's expression suggested he was calculating the potential disasters of bringing Elena Martinez into Tech Future's inner sanctum. But they both knew he couldn't refuse without undermining the image they'd crafted at the gala. Fine, he said finally. But remember, you're there to observe, not lead a revolution. When have I ever caused trouble? Elena smiled sweetly, hopping down from the counter. She deliberately ignored his steadying hand on her elbow, telling herself she hadn't felt that brief contact like an electric shock. The day at Tech Future proved more revealing than either of them had anticipated. Elena watched Chen in his element, moving through the sleek offices like a benevolent dictator. She expected to see the ruthless CEO from her articles. Instead, she found herself noting how he knew every employee's name, how he actually listened when junior developers raised concerns. The real surprise came during the AI Ethics Committee meeting. Elena sat quietly in the corner, taking notes as the team discussed implementing her suggested reforms. Chen didn't just pay lip service to ethical considerations, he actively engaged with the complexities, pushing back against quick fixes in favor of more comprehensive solutions. You're staring, he murmured as they walked to his next meeting. I'm observing, Elena corrected. There's a difference. And what have you observed, Dr. Martinez? That you're actually trying, she admitted reluctantly. Though your approach is still fundamentally flawed. You're treating ethics like another engineering problem to be solved with enough processing power. As opposed to your approach of treating every technological advance as a potential catastrophe? But there was no real heat in his words. If anything, he sounded almost amused. Their verbal sparring was interrupted by a commotion down the hall. A group of employees were gathered around a monitor, expressions tense. Chen immediately shifted into CEO mode, striding over to assess the situation. Elena followed, curiosity overriding her resolve to maintain professional distance. Global Tech just announced a competing ethical AI initiative, one of the developers explained. They're claiming they've been working on it for months, that they're the real pioneers in responsible development. Elena felt her blood boil. They're lying. They're trying to get ahead of the scandal by co-opting the very reforms they fought against. They're also offering you a job, another employee added, scrolling through the press release. They're publicly inviting Dr. Martinez to lead their ethics division. They're saying it would be a chance to effect real change, without having to resort to personal compromises. The implied criticism hung in the air. Elena felt the weight of every stare. The unspoken question, was her marriage to Chen just another corporate power play? Had she sold out her principles for funding, only to be offered a more legitimate path to change? She looked at Chen, expecting to see anger or betrayal. Instead, his face was completely blank, the same expression he'd worn when discussing his father's gambling in that first conversation. Without a word, he turned and walked to his office, closing the door with quiet finality. Elena stood frozen, torn between competing impulses. The Global Tech offer was everything she'd fought for, a chance to implement ethical oversight from within the industry. It would restore her credibility, prove she hadn't compromised her principles for personal gain. It was the logical choice. So why did watching Chen walk away feel like a punch to the gut? The developer was still talking, outlining Global Tech's proposal, but Elena wasn't listening. She was remembering Chen's speech at the gala, the way he'd actually engaged with her ideas instead of dismissing them. The small changes she'd already seen at Tech Future, the possibilities for real transformation. And underneath it all, the growing suspicion that there was more to Alexander Chen than she'd allowed herself to see. She turned away from the Global Tech announcement and walked to Chen's office. They needed to talk about ethics, about trust, about why this felt less and less like a business arrangement with each passing day. But when she opened the door, the words died in her throat. Chen sat at his desk, staring at an old photograph. Elena caught a glimpse of a younger version of him with an older man, his father. Before he quickly put it away. "Come to say goodbye?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No," Elena said slowly, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I came to talk about how we're going to handle global tech's obvious attempt to undermine both of us." Chen's head snapped up, something flickering in his eyes that made Elena's heart race. "Both of us?" "Well," she managed a small smile, "I am your wife, aren't I? Even if it's just for a month." The tension in the room shifted, became something else entirely. They stared at each other, the pretense of their arrangement suddenly feeling both more and less real than ever before. Elena had come to Tech Future, prepared to document its ethical failings. Instead, she found herself documenting the subtle changes in Chen's expression, the way he looked at her like she was code he couldn't quite crack. "Elena," he started, then stopped, uncharacteristically hesitant. The sound of her first name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Before either of them could say more, James burst into the office. "Alex, the board is calling an emergency meeting. They want to discuss the global tech situation, and your marriage." Reality crashed back in. Elena took a step back, remembering why she was really there. This wasn't a romance, it was a research project. A business arrangement. Wasn't it? If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The Tech Future boardroom felt like a courtroom, with Elena and Chen standing trial before a jury of their peers. Board members filled the sleek chairs around the massive table, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Elena had insisted on attending despite Chen's attempts to handle it alone, a decision she could tell made him both grateful and terrified. "This marriage was meant to improve our public image," Bernard Walsh, the oldest board member, spoke first. His bow tie was as stiff as his tone. "Instead, we're being blindsided by Global Tech's announcement. They're positioning themselves as the ethical choice while painting us as manipulators who had to resort to unusual measures to address our image problems." "The timing isn't coincidental," Chen replied, his voice steady. "They're trying to capitalize on the attention our initiatives have received. But we've been implementing real changes, not just PR moves." "Changes pushed by your wife," another board member interjected. "Who's now being offered a prestigious position by our biggest rival. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Elena felt Chen tense beside her. Before he could respond, she stood. "If you're implying that I orchestrated this situation, you're giving me far too much credit and Global Tech far too little scrutiny. They're trying to neutralize both me and Tech Future in one move. By offering you a legitimate platform for your work," Walsh pointed out. "Instead of this arrangement. You think their offer is legitimate?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They're the company I exposed for discriminatory practices. They fought against every ethical guideline I proposed. Now suddenly they want me to lead their ethics division? It's a transparent attempt to silence criticism and undermine the actual progress being made here." "Progress?" Walsh's eyebrows rose. "You've been here a week. What possible progress could dash?" "The predictive policing AI," Chen interrupted. "Elena's input led to a complete overhaul of our testing protocols. We discovered potential bias issues that could have caused serious problems post-launch. The ethical review process she suggested for the autonomous vehicle division has already identified 3 critical safety improvements. And her framework for algorithmic transparency is something we should have implemented years ago." Elena stared at him, caught off guard by the forceful defense. She'd known about some of these changes, but hearing Chen articulate their value so clearly, using her first name without hesitation. "That's all very admirable," Walsh said slowly, "but it doesn't address the current situation. Global Tech's offer puts us in an untenable position. If Dr. Martinez accepts, it validates their claims and damages our credibility. If she stays, given the unusual nature of her relationship with our CEO, every decision we make will be questioned. Then question them, Chen snapped, an edge entering his voice. Scrutinize every change, demand justification for every ethical guideline. Elena's work stands on its own merits. Whether she's my wife or not doesn't change the fact that she's right about the responsibility we have to do better. The passion in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Elena's chest. She found herself reaching for his hand under the table, a gesture meant to offer support. But when their fingers intertwined, the contact felt like more than just solidarity. Chen's thumb brushed across her knuckles, and Elena had to suppress a shiver. Perhaps, Walsh said carefully, we should discuss this privately with Mr. Chen. Dr. Martinez, if you wouldn't mind. My wife stays. Chen's voice was quiet but firm. She's as invested in Tech Future's future as any of us. More, maybe, because she actually cares about the impact our work has on real people. The moment stretched, tension crackling. Then James cleared his throat. I move that we take some time to review the situation. In the meantime, we should proceed with implementing the ethical guidelines already approved. Showing concrete progress is our best defense against Global Tech's claims. Slowly, heads nodded around the table. As the board members filed out, Elena became acutely aware that she was still holding Chen's hand. She tried to pull away, but he held on for a moment longer, his grip tightening briefly before releasing her. That was unexpected, she said when they were alone. What was? You. Defending my work like that. Using my first name. Chen turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. Is it really so surprising that I might actually believe in what you're doing? That working with you could have changed my perspective? Yes, Elena admitted. It is. Because if you're capable of that kind of change, if you actually care about these issues. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. If you're not the soulless tech titan I thought you were, then what am I doing here? Then your whole hypothesis about me might be wrong? Chen stepped closer, close enough that Elena had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. That must be frustrating for a researcher of your caliber. I should go, Elena said quickly, gathering her notes. I need to analyze the implications of Global Tech's announcement. Prepare a response. Elena. The way he said her name stopped her at the door. Why did you really turn them down? The logical choice would be to accept their offer. Legitimate change from within, isn't that what you wanted? She couldn't look at him. Maybe I'm not feeling very logical right now. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Chen spoke, will you have dinner with me tonight? Elena did turn then, startled. We have dinner together every night. No, we eat in the same space, while working on our laptops. Have dinner with me. Just, us. It was a terrible idea. Their arrangement was already complicated enough without adding, whatever this was. Elena opened her mouth to refuse, to maintain professional boundaries. Instead, she heard herself say, okay. Chen's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger, more human. Elena fled before she could do something truly stupid, like kiss him to see if he'd smile like that again. In the elevator, she pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall. What are you doing? She whispered to herself. But she already knew the answer, and it terrified her. Because somehow, without meaning to, she'd started falling for the man she was supposed to be studying. And she had no data to tell her what to do about it. Elena spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. Everything in her wardrobe was chosen for practicality or professionalism, nothing suited a dinner that felt uncomfortably like a real date. She finally settled on a simple dark blue dress she'd bought for a conference keynote and never worn, letting her hair fall loose around her shoulders instead of its usual severe bun. When she emerged from her room, she found the penthouse transformed. The harsh overhead lights were dimmed, replaced by the warm glow of candles. The dining table was set for two, and the scent of actual cooking, not takeout, filled the air. Chen stood at the stove, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up as he stirred something that smelled incredible. "You cook?" Elena couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Chen turned, and for a moment just stared at her, something flickering in his eyes that made her cheeks warm. "Cooking is just chemistry with more immediate results," he said finally. "Though I'm out of practice. I haven't made this since." "Since," she prompted, moving closer to peer at the pan. "Since my father left," he admitted quietly. "It was his recipe. The only thing he taught me that didn't end in disaster." Elena absorbed this rare personal detail, filing it away with the photograph she'd glimpsed in his office. "What is it?" "Hong Kong-style black pepper beef. Comfort food from the years before he discovered gambling was more exciting than raising a family." Chen's tone was matter-of-fact, but Elena heard the old pain underneath. "Wine." She accepted the glass he offered, their fingers brushing. Neither pulled away immediately. "Tell me about him," Elena said softly. "Help me understand." Chen was quiet for a long moment, focusing on plating their food. Only when they were seated, the candles casting dancing shadows between them, did he speak. He was brilliant. Creative. Could see possibilities nobody else imagined. But he was also restless. Nothing was ever enough. He'd build something successful, then risk it all on the next big thing. Until eventually. He trailed off, taking a long drink of wine. "Until he lost everything," Elena finished gently. Chen nodded. "I was 15. Watched my mother work 3 jobs to keep us afloat while he chased his next sure thing. I swore I'd never take risks I couldn't control. That every move I made would be calculated, guaranteed to succeed." "Is that what this is?" Elena gestured between them. "A calculated risk?" His eyes met hers across the candlelight. "This stopped being calculated the moment you sat on my kitchen counter and critiqued my coffee organization system." Elena's heart skipped, but she forced herself to ask, "Then what is it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "For the first time in my life, I can't predict the variables. You challenge everything I think I know, every system I built. And instead of wanting to shut down the disruption, I find myself." He paused, struggling for words. "Looking forward to it?" Elena offered, remembering their morning coffee confrontations, the way their arguments had slowly evolved into something closer to collaboration. "Yes." Chen leaned forward, his expression intense. "Do you know what I thought when I first read your critiques of Tech Future? Before the bet, before any of this?" Elena shook her head, transfixed by the passion in his voice. "I thought, she sees it all, every flaw, every shortcut, every potential problem. And instead of looking away or accepting it as the cost of progress, she demands better. Do you know how rare that is? To find someone who not only identifies the problems, but actually believes they can be solved?" Elena's voice caught. She took a sip of wine to cover her confusion. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go. She'd prepared for corporate discussion, for more ethical debates. Not for Alexander Chen looking at her like she was code he desperately wanted to understand. "The food is getting cold," she managed. They ate in charged silence, both hyper-aware of every accidental touch as they passed dishes. The beef was perfectly spiced, complex flavors layering together. Elena watched Chen take his first bite, saw the memories flash across his face. "It's delicious," she said softly. "Your father taught you well, at least in this." "Sometimes I wonder." Chen set down his fork. "If he hadn't left, if I hadn't been so determined to be his opposite, would I have built Tech Future differently? Taken more chances on the human element instead of relying purely on data?" "We can't change the past," Elena replied. "But we can shape the future. Your company is listening now, making real changes. Because of you." "With me," she corrected. "Change doesn't work as a hostile takeover. It has to be collaborative." She paused, realizing how much her own stance had evolved. I've learned that, working with you. Chen reached across the table, his fingers brushing her wrist. Elena. The elevator chimed. They jerked apart as James burst in, looking harried. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. Global Tech just leaked emails suggesting your marriage was arranged, a corporate merger dressed up as romance. They're painting it as proof that Tech Future's ethical initiatives are just PR moves. Elena felt the intimate atmosphere shatter. Chen was already reaching for his phone, CEO mask sliding back into place. But she caught his other hand before he could pull completely away. Alex, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time. His eyes snapped to hers, startled. We'll handle it. Together. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the candle still flickering between them like binary code, ones and zeros, yes and no, truth and lies. Then Chen squeezed her hand, and Elena felt something shift irreversibly in her carefully ordered hypothesis about him. The bet that had started all this suddenly felt very far away, and completely beside the point. The next morning found Elena and Chen in his home office, surrounded by laptops and empty coffee cups as they crafted their response to Global Tech's leak. The intimate atmosphere of their dinner felt like a dream, replaced by the harsh reality of corporate warfare. Yet something had shifted between them. Elena noticed it in the way Chen unconsciously oriented himself toward her, how their hands would brush as they passed documents back and forth. They don't actually have proof, James said, pacing behind them. The emails they leaked are all internal Global Tech speculation. But the story's catching fire because it fits people's preconceptions. The ruthless CEO and the ethical crusader, it seems too strange to be real. That's because it wasn't real, Chen muttered, then caught himself as Elena's head snapped up. At first, he added quickly. It wasn't real at first. The implications of that addition hung in the air between them until James cleared his throat. Regardless, we need to get ahead of this. The board's asking for an emergency session this afternoon. They're worried about shareholder reaction. Let me handle the board, Elena said suddenly. Both men turned to stare at her. What? They want to know if our relationship is genuine? Let me show them exactly what I've learned about Tech Future and its CEO in the past 2 weeks. Elena. Chen's voice held a warning note. The board isn't like your academic audiences. They care about profit margins, not ethical philosophies. Then it's time they learned how the two are connected. She stood, gathering her research notes. Trust me, Alex. I know what I'm doing. He caught her arm as she headed for the door. When you talk to them, how much are you going to reveal? Elena met his eyes, understanding the real question. How much of their personal evolution would she expose? Where did the performance end and the truth begin? Only what needs to be said, she answered softly. Some things aren't for public consumption. The board meeting was less formal than the previous day's session, held in a smaller conference room that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Elena stood before them, every eye critical, every posture skeptical. Dr. Martinez, Walsh began, given the current speculation about the nature of your relationship with Mr. Chen, perhaps you could clarify a few points for us. Actually, Elena interrupted, I'd like to clarify something else first. Would you like to know what I've discovered about your CEO and your company in the past 2 weeks? Without waiting for a response, she pulled up her research notes on the room's main screen. Day 1, subject displays rigid adherence to control mechanisms, likelihood of childhood trauma related to unpredictability. She clicked through her early observations. Day 3, first signs of adaptability when presented with empirical evidence of ethical concerns. Day 5, notable shift from defensive responses to active engagement with criticism. The board members exchanged glances as she continued. Day 7, subject demonstrates unexpected emotional intelligence when handling employee concerns about AI implementation. Day 10, integration of ethical considerations into development process appears genuine, not performative. This is all very interesting, Walsh cut in, but dash. I'm not finished. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. You see, I came here to study tech future's ethical failings. To document how profit always trumps human concerns in tech development. Instead, I found something entirely different. I found a company capable of change. A CEO willing to question his assumptions when presented with new data. And most surprisingly, she paused, fighting to keep her voice steady. I found that my own hypothesis about Alexander Chen was fundamentally flawed. She clicked to her most recent notes, written just that morning. Final observation: subject's apparent coldness is not lack of humanity, but fear of repeating past patterns of instability. Corporate structure built on control is protection, not prison. When given reason to trust, capable of profound adaptation and growth. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena forced herself to meet each board member's eyes. You're worried about global tech's allegations? Be worried. But not because our relationship might be fake. Be worried because it's real, and because that reality threatens their entire narrative about tech future. Explain, Walsh demanded, leaning forward. They want to paint us as cynical manipulators, using marriage as a PR stunt. But the truth is more dangerous to them. Because the truth is that tech future, under Alexander Chen's leadership, is actually changing. Integrating ethical oversight into every level of development. Creating technology that serves humanity instead of subjugating it. And doing it not because of public pressure or PR concerns, but because it's the right thing to do. Elena pulled up Tech Future's latest project data. Look at the improvements in the predictive policing AI since implementing ethical review. Look at the increased accuracy in the autonomous vehicle systems when we accounted for diverse user scenarios. This isn't just moral philosophy, it's better business. And global tech knows it. That's why they're trying to discredit us now, before our success proves that ethical technology is more profitable than cutting corners. She felt rather than saw Chen enter the room behind her. Felt his presence like a gravitational force, supporting her without saying a word. So yes, investigate our relationship. Question our motives. But don't let global tech's desperate attempts to maintain the status quo blind you to the real story here. Tech future is evolving. The question is, will you evolve with it, or be left behind? The boardroom erupted in discussion. Through the chaos, Elena felt Chen's hand slip into hers, hidden from view. She squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement of everything still unspoken between them. Later, in the elevator, Chen finally spoke. You didn't tell them about the bet. No, Elena said quietly. Because it's not relevant anymore, is it? He turned to face her, and Elena saw in his eyes the same vulnerability she'd glimpsed over dinner. When did you know? That things had changed? I think I started suspecting when you defended my work to the board. But I didn't want to admit it. She managed a shaky smile. It's terrible scientific practice to get emotionally involved with your research subject. Chen's free hand came up to cup her cheek, and Elena felt her careful professional distance crumbling. And what are your observations about that particular development, Dr. Martinez? Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened to reveal James, looking grim. Alex, there's something you need to see. Something about Elena. The moment shattered. Elena felt Chen's hand fall away as James held up his tablet. And there, in damning black and white, was proof that global tech hadn't just been speculating. Somehow, they'd discovered the truth about the bet that had started everything. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The headline on James's tablet burned itself into Elena's vision. Tech future CEO's marriage revealed as $1 million bet. The accompanying article included private text messages between Chen and James, discussing the terms of their wager. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she read words that turned her world inside out. 1 month to prove I can win over my biggest critic. If I fail, I step down as CEO. She became aware of Chen trying to explain, his words coming fast and desperate. Elena, let me dash. Don't. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and cold. Was any of it real? Or was I just the most challenging possible proof of concept? You know it's more than that now. Chen reached for her, but Elena stepped back, bumping into the elevator wall. Everything I said, everything we built together, dash. Built together? Elena laughed, but it came out more like a sob. You mean everything you orchestrated? Was that what last night was? Another calculated move to ensure you'd win your bet? The bet stopped mattering weeks ago. There was real anguish in Chen's voice now, something she'd never heard before. You changed everything. The way I think about technology, about ethics, about dash. About what, Alex? About love? Elena's hands were shaking as she pulled up her research notes on her tablet. I documented everything, you know. Every shift in your behavior, every apparent change of heart. I thought I was observing genuine evolution. Instead, I was just tracking your impressive commitment to winning at all costs. James cleared his throat awkwardly. I should give you two some privacy, dash. No need. Elena straightened her spine, drawing on years of academic presentations to keep her voice steady. I believe this concludes our arrangement, Mr. Chen. Congratulations on winning your bet. I'm sure stepping down as CEO is no longer a concern. Elena, please. Chen's mask had cracked completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. What you said to the board, about your hypothesis being wrong about me, that was real. You know it was real. What I know, Elena said quietly, is that I was wrong about a lot of things. Starting with the belief that people can change. She turned to James. I trust the funding for my institute is still secure? We did have a contract, after all. Of course, but dash. Then I'll have my things removed from the penthouse today. I'm sure you can handle any necessary press releases about our amicable separation. The professional tone was killing her, but it was all that was keeping her upright. Creative differences, perhaps. Or just admit the truth, it was all a corporate experiment in ethical manipulation. That's not fair, Chen protested. You're not just an experiment to me. Last night, when I told you about my father, dash. Don't. Elena held up a hand, finally meeting his eyes. The pain she saw there almost broke her resolve. Don't use your trauma to manipulate me. You're good at that, you know? Using just enough truth to make the lies palatable. I almost fell for it. There are no lies. Chen's composure shattered completely. The bet was real, yes. It started as a stupid challenge. But everything that happened after, every conversation, every argument, every moment of understanding, that was real. You have to believe me. I'm a scientist, Mr. Chen. I believe in empirical evidence. And the evidence suggests that everything between us was an elaborate experiment in behavioral modification. You wanted to prove you could change your biggest critic's perspective. Well, mission accomplished. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Elena stepped out on legs that felt like water, her professional mask cracking slightly. You know what the worst part is? I actually started believing in your capacity for change. Started thinking that maybe profit wasn't your only driving force. She managed a bitter smile. I guess that proves I'm not as good a researcher as I thought. I let my personal feelings compromise my objectivity. Elena. Chen's voice stopped her at the lobby doors. What if I told you I love you? She didn't turn around. Couldn't. Because if she saw his face now, her carefully constructed walls would crumble completely. I'd say that's a fascinating data point for my final analysis. How far Alexander Chen will go to win a bet. She walked out into the San Francisco sunshine, each step feeling like lead. Behind her, she heard the distinctive sound of someone punching a wall, followed by James's concerned voice. Elena kept walking, her vision blurring with unshed tears. In her purse, her phone buzzed repeatedly, Probably global tech, eager to capitalize on the scandal by renewing their job offer. The thought made her nauseous. Or maybe that was just the realization that she'd have to rewrite her entire paper. Subject demonstrates remarkable commitment to predetermined outcomes, she muttered, her scientific detachment finally cracking as a tear slid down her cheek. Even at the cost of. She couldn't finish the thought. Because the real hypothesis she'd gotten wrong wasn't about Alexander Chen's capacity for change. It was about her own capacity to maintain professional distance while falling in love with her research subject. And that was data she wasn't ready to analyze. Alexander Chen sat in his darkened office, staring at the city lights below while an ice pack numbed his bruised knuckles. The wall hadn't stood a chance against his frustration, but the physical pain did nothing to dull the ache in his chest. Elena's tablet lay on his desk, she'd left it behind in her hurry to escape. The screen still displayed her research notes, a clinical documentation of their time together that now felt like evidence in a trial he'd already lost. You know, James said from the doorway, for a guy who prides himself on strategic thinking, this might be your biggest tactical error yet. Not now, James. Yes, now. James dropped into the chair across from him. Because in about an hour, every tech blog in Silicon Valley is going to be running with this story. Global Tech's PR team is already spinning it as proof that Tech Future's ethical initiatives were just elaborate theater. And Elena. Don't say her name. Chen's voice was raw. I can't. Can't what? Admit that you finally found something you care about more than control and let it slip away because you were too proud to tell her the truth from the beginning? Chen turned from the window, anger flashing in his eyes. You think I don't know that? You think I don't replay every moment, seeing all the times I could have told her? Should have told her? So why didn't you? Because. Chen ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his usual polish completely abandoned. Because every day it got harder. Every morning over coffee, every argument about ethical guidelines, every moment she challenged me to be better, the bet became this tiny, stupid thing compared to what was actually happening between us. I thought if I just waited until the month was over, if I could show her that the changes were real. You sound like your father, James said quietly. Gambling everything on a future payoff instead of dealing with the present reality. The words hit Chen like a physical blow. He stared at his bruised hand, remembering Elena's face when he'd told her about his father over dinner. The understanding in her eyes, the way she'd seen past his defenses to the scared 15-year-old still trying to protect himself from chaos. I've become everything I swore I wouldn't be, he whispered. Making the same mistakes, hurting people I love. Say that again. What? You love her? James leaned forward. Not as part of the bet. Not as a strategic move. You, Alexander Chen, have actually fallen in love with the woman who once called you a technocratic despot with the emotional intelligence of a spreadsheet. Despite everything, Chen felt his lips twitch at the memory of that particular article. She wasn't entirely wrong. No, she wasn't. But she made you want to prove her wrong, and not just because of some stupid bet. James stood, straightening his jacket. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? Chen picked up Elena's tablet, scrolling through her notes. Past the early criticisms, beyond the clinical observations, he found entries that revealed her own changing perspective. Small notes in the margins showed her questioning her assumptions, struggling with her growing feelings. The final entry, written just that morning, caught his breath. Personal note: scientific objectivity compromised by emotional investment in subject. Professional distance no longer possible. Recommendations for future researchers: love makes unreliable data. She felt it too, he murmured, then looked up at James. I need your help. With what? Everything I built, Tech Future, my reputation, my control, I built it to prove I wasn't my father. To show that I could succeed without taking unnecessary risks. Chen stood, sudden energy coursing through him. But Elena was right. Real innovation requires risking failure. Real change means letting go of control. Alex. James's voice held a warning note. What are you planning? The truth. All of it. A public statement taking full responsibility for the bet, making it clear Elena knew nothing about it. Then a complete restructuring of Tech Future's ethical oversight, implementing every change she suggested, whether she's here or not. Chen was already typing on his phone, drafting emails. And then I'm going to do the one thing my father never did. Chen met his friend's eyes. I'm going to admit I was wrong, accept the consequences, and fight like hell to fix it. James studied him for a long moment, then nodded. The board will fight you on this. Full transparency could tank our stock price. Let them fight. Let global tech spread their stories. None of it matters if I can't prove to Elena that some things are worth more than winning. Chen looked out at the city again, but this time he wasn't seeing the lights. He was seeing Elena's face when she defended him to the board, believing in his capacity for change even while protecting their private moments. I built this company on the belief that any problem can be solved with enough processing power. Time to test that theory on matters of the heart. And if you fail? Chen touched the screen of Elena's tablet, where her final note glowed like an accusation, or maybe a challenge. Then I fail. But at least I'll fail trying to do the right thing, not hiding behind contracts and control. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a message from Walsh, emergency board meeting in 30 minutes. Damage control needed immediately. Chen straightened his tie, squaring his shoulders. Time to see if I've learned anything from Elena about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. You know, James said as they headed for the door, for a guy who built his fortune on predictive algorithms, you're about to do something completely unpredictable. Maybe that's the point, Chen replied softly. Some variables can't be calculated. Some risks are worth taking blind. He picked up Elena's tablet, holding it like something precious. Somewhere in the city, she was probably working on her final analysis of him, documenting his failures in meticulous detail. He could only hope she was still watching closely enough to see what happened next. Elena sat in her cramped office at the institute, surrounded by boxes of hastily packed belongings from Chen's penthouse. Her laptop displayed dozens of incoming news alerts, all variations on the same theme: Tech Future CEO calls emergency press conference. She told herself she wasn't going to watch it. Then found herself clicking the live stream link anyway. The Tech Future auditorium was packed with press, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. When Chen walked onto the stage, Elena's breath caught. He looked different, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. He carried no notes, no tablet. Just her tablet, which he placed carefully on the podium. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice steady despite his appearance. I'm here to address the recent allegations about my marriage to Dr. Elena Martinez. But first, I need to tell you about my father. In her office, Elena sat up straighter. This wasn't the corporate damage control she'd expected. When I was 15, Chen continued, my father's gambling addiction destroyed our family. He risked everything on the belief that the next bet would solve all our problems. I built Tech Future on the opposite principle: total control, no unnecessary risks. Every decision calculated, every outcome predicted. I thought that made me different from him. He picked up Elena's tablet, and her heart stopped as she recognized her own words on the screen behind him. But recently, someone showed me that controlling risk isn't the same as creating value. That real innovation requires the courage to be wrong, to be vulnerable, to care more about impact than image. The reports about a bet are true, he admitted, causing a stir in the audience. I made a wager with my CFO that I could convince Dr. Martinez to marry me for 1 month. It was arrogant, manipulative, and completely unworthy of both her principles and my position as CEO. Dr. Martinez knew nothing about this bet. Her actions, her insights, and her commitment to ethical technology were completely genuine. Elena found herself leaning closer to the screen, unable to look away as Chen continued. But something unexpected happened. In trying to prove I could change her perspective, she changed mine. Not because of any bet, but because she was right. About technology's impact on humanity. About the responsibility we have to do better. About me. He looked directly into the camera then, and Elena felt like he was speaking directly to her. I've spent my life avoiding my father's mistakes, but I ended up making my own. I gambled something far more precious than money. I risked someone's trust. Someone who taught me that real strength isn't about control, it's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the commitment to do better. So today, I'm announcing several changes at Tech Future. First, we're implementing all of Dr. Martinez's recommended ethical oversight measures, including independent review boards and mandatory impact assessments. Second, I'm stepping down as CEO. The room erupted in chaos. Elena's phone began buzzing with messages, but she couldn't tear her eyes from the screen. Not because I lost a bet, Chin clarified once the noise died down. But because rebuilding trust requires more than words. I'll be taking a position as head of our new Ethics and Innovation Division, working to integrate responsible development practices across all our projects. And I'm hoping. His voice caught slightly. I'm hoping that somewhere, Dr. Martinez is watching, and will consider this a first step toward proving that people can change. That some risks are worth taking. And that some bets, once made, become irrelevant in the face of real feelings. He held up her tablet one last time. Your research notes were right about one thing. I was afraid of unpredictability, of losing control. But you were wrong about something else. The changes weren't an act. They weren't about winning a bet. They were about realizing that some things, some people, are worth risking everything for. Elena barely registered the rest of the press conference, her mind spinning with implications. Her phone kept buzzing, calls from reporters, messages from colleagues, a particularly smug text from Sarah Williams saying, "Told you so." She ignored them all, focusing on the last page of notes displayed on Chen's screen. Her own words stared back at her, "Love makes unreliable data." A knock on her office door made her jump. Tommy stood there, holding a coffee and looking uncertain. "So, that happened. Want to talk about it?" "I don't know what to think," Elena admitted. "This could still be an elaborate PR move." "Could be," Tommy agreed. "Except the board is already releasing statements opposing his decisions. Global Tech's stock is surging while Tech Futures drops. He's basically torching everything he built, for what? To prove a point? To prove he can change," Elena whispered, remembering the way Chen had looked when telling her about his father. The vulnerability in his eyes when he'd cooked dinner. The passion when he'd defended her to the board. "You know," Tommy said carefully, "for someone who advocates for ethical technology, you're being awfully skeptical of evidence that people can actually change." Elena stared at her screen, where financial news tickers were already documenting the market's reaction to Chen's announcement. He'd given up control of his company, risked his reputation, exposed his deepest fears, all to prove that some things mattered more than winning. "Maybe," she said slowly, "I need to run one more experiment." If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The Tech Future building was eerily quiet when Elena walked in that evening. Most employees had gone home, shell-shocked by the day's events. Her old security clearance still worked, either an oversight or, knowing Chen, a deliberate choice. The elevator ride to his office felt longer than ever, giving her too much time to second-guess her decision to come. She found him sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the city lights and the glow of multiple screens displaying market analyses and news coverage. The headlines were brutal: Tech Future in crisis, Chen's career suicide, ethics versus economics, the price of principle. He didn't turn when she entered, though she knew he must have hurt her. "Your stock is down 18%, she said quietly. 22 now, he corrected, still not turning. The board is threatening legal action. James has been fielding calls from panicked investors all day. And Global Tech just announced a major expansion of their AI division, targeting our most valuable clients. Elena moved closer, noting the untouched glass of scotch on his desk. Quite a price to pay for a public apology. It wasn't an apology. Now he did turn, and the raw honesty in his eyes took her breath away. It was a confession. A correction of data. A necessary step in achieving accurate results. Despite everything, Elena felt her lips twitch. You're really going to use research metaphors right now? I thought you might appreciate the scientific approach. The ghost of a smile crossed his face before fading. Though I'm beginning to understand why you always insisted that human elements can't be reduced to pure data. Elena picked up her tablet from his desk, scrolling through her notes. Subject demonstrates unexpected capacity for adaptation when core values are challenged, she read aloud. Shows remarkable willingness to sacrifice established patterns when presented with sufficient motivation for change. Are those your original notes, or new observations? Both. She set the tablet down, perching on the edge of his desk. I have a hypothesis I'd like to test. Something flickered in his eyes, hope, maybe, or fear. I'm not sure I can handle any more experiments. Just one. Elena leaned forward, studying his face with the same intensity she'd brought to all her research. You gave up control of your company, risked your reputation, exposed your deepest fears to the world. Either you're running the most elaborate corporate manipulation in history. Or you really did change. Not because of a bet, but because sometimes. She took a deep breath. Sometimes love makes unreliable data. Chen stood slowly, carefully, like any sudden movement might shatter the moment. That's not a very scientific conclusion, Dr. Martinez. No, Elena agreed, her heart racing as he moved closer. But I've learned that some hypotheses can only be tested through direct experience. And what experience did you have in mind? Instead of answering, Elena reached up and pulled him down to her, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like the conclusion to 1,000 arguments, the resolution of every opposing force they'd represented. Chen's arms wrapped around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, became something hungry and honest and completely uncontrolled. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Elena rested her forehead against his chest. Interesting data point, she murmured. Chen's laugh rumbled through her. Always the researcher. His hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward him. But I notice you didn't document that observation in your notes. Some things don't need to be documented. She smiled up at him. Some things just need to be felt. Elena. His voice was serious now. I know I have a lot to prove. To you, to the company, to myself. I can't guarantee I won't make mistakes, this is all uncharted territory for me. Good. She reached up to smooth his disheveled tie. Because if you were still trying to control everything, still calculating every outcome, then nothing would really have changed. Everything's changed, he whispered against her hair. You changed everything. We changed each other, she corrected. That's what happens when you let yourself be vulnerable enough to really see someone else. To risk being wrong. To fall in love, despite all logical evidence suggesting it's a terrible idea. Chen pulled back slightly, studying her face. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying. Elena took a deep breath. I'm saying that my research has yielded unexpected results. That sometimes the most significant findings come from failed experiments. And that maybe love isn't something that can be calculated or controlled or won through careful strategy. Now who's being unscientific? Shut up and kiss me again, Elena said. I need more data points. Chen complied, and for once in his life, he didn't try to predict or control the outcome. He simply let himself feel, let himself be present in a moment that couldn't be quantified or optimized or reduced to binary code. Outside his office windows, San Francisco glittered like a circuit board come to life. Somewhere in the building, servers hummed with artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms. But here, in this moment, technology took a back seat to the most human of experiences, the simple, complex, terrifying, wonderful act of choosing to trust, to risk, to love. 3 months later, Elena stood at the podium in Tech Future's main auditorium, addressing a packed crowd of employees, press, and industry leaders. The company's new Ethics and Innovation Center stretched behind her, its glass walls displaying teams of developers and ethicists working side by side. "Technology without conscience is just power without purpose," she began, her voice strong and clear. "For too long, the tech industry has operated on the principle of move fast and break things. Today, Tech Future is proving there's another way. Move thoughtfully and fix things. Build bridges instead of disrupting foundations. Create technology that serves humanity rather than subjugating it." From his seat in the front row, Chen watched her with undisguised pride. He'd traded his CEO suite for a smaller office in the Ethics Center, where he worked alongside Elena to integrate ethical considerations into every aspect of development. The transition hadn't been smooth, several board members had resigned in protest, and their stock was still recovering. But something remarkable had happened in the process. "Our new approach has already yielded unexpected benefits," Elena continued, pulling up project data on the massive screen. "The revised predictive policing AI, developed with community input and rigorous bias testing, has shown a 40% improvement in accuracy. Our autonomous vehicle systems, redesigned to account for diverse user scenarios, have set new industry standards for safety. And our latest neural network architecture, built with embedded ethical constraints, processes information more efficiently than our previous models." She gestured to the teams visible through the glass walls. "This isn't just about adding oversight or restrictions. It's about recognizing that ethical technology is better technology. That considering human impact doesn't slow innovation, it guides it toward meaningful progress." In the audience, James nudged Chen with his elbow. "Still think letting her redesign our entire development process was a good bet?" "Best risk I ever took," Chen replied quietly, his hand touching the small velvet box in his pocket. He'd spent weeks designing the perfect ring, only to realize that Elena would prefer the vintage piece that had belonged to his mother, the one reminder of a time before gambling had torn his family apart. Some lessons, it seemed, stayed learned. Elena was wrapping up her presentation, answering questions with the same passionate intensity that had first caught Chen's attention in her criticism of the company. But now that passion was directed toward building something together, toward proving that profit and ethics weren't opposing forces, but complementary strengths. "Dr. Martinez," a reporter called out. "Given your history of criticizing tech companies, how do you respond to accusations that you've been co-opted by the industry?" "I haven't been co-opted," Elena replied with a smile. "I've been listened to. There's a difference between compromising your principles and finding common ground to build something better. Tech Future isn't perfect, no company is. But we're committed to learning, to adapting, to doing better. Not because it's profitable, though it often is, but because it's right." Her eyes met Chen's across the auditorium, and the look they shared spoke volumes about how far they'd come. From adversaries to allies, from a calculated bet to something real and lasting. The next question made them both laugh. "And what about your relationship with Mr. Chen? Was that also about finding common ground?" Actually, Elena's eyes sparkled with mischief. That was about discovering that some things can't be calculated or controlled. That sometimes the best innovations come from letting go of old algorithms and embracing new possibilities. After the presentation, they walked together through the Ethics Center, watching their merged teams collaborate on projects that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. Chen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "The board meeting went well this morning," he told her. "Our new ethical AI framework is attracting investors who want to get ahead of coming regulations. Turns out principle can be profitable." "Imagine that," Elena teased. "Almost like some of us have been saying that all along." Chen pulled her into an empty conference room, suddenly serious. "I've been thinking about algorithms lately. When are you not? About how they work best with complete data sets. How missing variables can skew results. He touched her cheek gently. How sometimes the most important factors can't be quantified. Elena's breath caught as she realized where this was going. Alex. The thing about betting on love, he continued softly, is that you can never really calculate the odds. You just have to trust that some risks are worth taking. He reached into his pocket, then paused. Unless you need more data points for your research? I think, Elena said, pulling him down for a kiss, I have sufficient evidence to support my conclusions. The ring, when he finally showed it to her, was perfectly imperfect, a family heirloom representing both painful history and new beginnings. Just like them. Just like the company they were rebuilding together, proof that the most powerful innovations come from combining head and heart, ethics and ambition, control and trust. Yes, Elena said before he could even ask. Then, unable to resist, though we should probably document the variables involved in this decision. Chen laughed, sliding the ring onto her finger. I love you, Dr. Martinez. Even when you're being impossibly scientific. Especially then, she corrected, her eyes shining. And I love you, even when you're trying to optimize romance with algorithms. Outside the conference room, their teams continued working, building technology that would shape the future. But in that moment, the most important innovation wasn't happening on screens or in code. It was happening in the space between two people who had learned that the best disruptions aren't about breaking things, they're about building something better together. 1 year later, Elena stood in the familiar kitchen of what was now their home, watching Alex organize their morning coffee supplies with his characteristic precision. Some habits never changed, but now they made her smile instead of roll her eyes. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, the vintage stone a daily reminder that the most precious things in life couldn't be bought or calculated. Your keynote speech for the Ethics in Tech conference is trending, Alex said, sliding her coffee across the counter. He'd finally accepted that she preferred drinking there rather than at the table. Global Tech's CEO looks nervous. He should be, Elena replied, pulling up the latest industry reports on her tablet. Their ethical AI initiative is falling apart because they treated it like a PR exercise instead of a fundamental change. You can't fake genuine transformation. Speaking of transformation, Alex pulled out a familiar device from his briefcase, her old research tablet, the one that had documented their journey. I found this while we were packing up my old office. Your final analysis never made it into the official record. Elena took the tablet, scrolling through her notes from that turbulent month. Her clinical observations gradually evolved into something more personal, more honest. The final entry, written after their reconciliation, made her throat tight with emotion. Final analysis, subject Alexander Chen demonstrated that genuine change occurs not through external pressure or calculated strategies, but through the willingness to risk vulnerability. The initial hypothesis, that tech industry leaders prioritize profit over human concerns, proved incomplete. When presented with compelling evidence of alternative approaches, and more importantly, when personally invested in understanding human impact, meaningful transformation is possible. Personal note, in studying the intersection of technology and humanity, this researcher discovered that the most powerful innovations come not from controlling variables, but from embracing them. Love, it turns out, is the ultimate disruptive force. It breaks down our carefully constructed systems and rebuilds them into something better. The true measure of success isn't in winning bets or maintaining control, but in having the courage to let our hearts compute what our minds cannot calculate. You never published this, Alex noted, reading over her shoulder. Some findings are too personal to share, Elena smiled, then gestured to the view outside their window. The Tech Future campus had changed dramatically over the past year. The Ethics and Innovation Center had expanded to occupy a significant portion of the complex, its transparent architecture a physical manifestation of their commitment to openness and accountability. Teams of developers and ethicists collaborated in shared spaces, while community representatives regularly participated in project reviews. More importantly, their approach was spreading. Other companies, seeing tech future success, had begun implementing similar models. The industry was slowly shifting from a move fast and break things mentality to one that valued responsible innovation and human impact. Did you ever imagine this? Elena asked, watching young developers excitedly discuss ethical guidelines with the same passion they once reserved for coding breakthroughs. When you made that bet with James, did you ever think it would lead to all this? Alex wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. I thought I was taking a calculated risk to prove a point. Instead, I learned that the most important calculations can't be done on spreadsheets. And what calculations are those? The value of being proved wrong by someone who makes you want to be better. The return on investment of trusting your heart over your algorithms. The compound interest of loving someone who challenges everything you thought you knew. Elena turned in his arms, facing him with the same intensity she'd once brought to criticizing his company. You know what the real irony is? We both thought we were studying each other, me documenting ethical failings, you proving you could change your biggest critic. But in the end, we were learning the same lesson, Alex finished. That real innovation, real change, real love, they all require the same thing. The courage to let go of control and trust in something bigger than our own carefully calculated plans. Outside, San Francisco was coming alive with morning activity. In offices across the city, decisions were being made that would shape the future of technology and society. But here in their kitchen, a former tech titan and his one-time biggest critic had discovered a different kind of innovation, one that couldn't be measured in stock prices or market share. They had learned that the greatest disruptions don't come from breaking things, but from having the courage to fix them. That the most powerful algorithms aren't the ones that process data, but the ones that process love. And that sometimes, the best way to change the world is to let the world change you first. As they headed out to face another day of merging ethics with innovation, their story stood as testament to a simple truth. In a world obsessed with artificial intelligence, it's genuine human connection that truly transforms us. Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to bet on love instead of logic, to choose trust over control, and to prove that the heart's calculations, though impossible to quantify, are the ones that matter most.